Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Discover Dorico for June. As usual, I will just wait a second while we do a quick audio test to make sure you can all hear me. Today is the 26th of June, if you're watching this live. I'm going to be using Dorico version 2.2.20. So I hope you have a cup of tea or something cool if you're in a heat wave. And let's begin. For the regular listeners, a little bit of bad news to start off with. I'm afraid the ice cream van has already been. Sorry about that. So I'm just going to wait a second and check. I will be reading the comments today. Apparently the sound is a little low, so I'm going to tweak that a little for you and see if that's any better. So I'll be reading the comments, so if you have any questions as we go, then please let me know. If you're not watching this live, then please, or you can email discoverdorico@steinberg.de, and if you've got any ideas and things for future sessions, that would be great. Apparently still would like it a little louder. Let's just tweak that a second. You can all let me know if we are indeed a little louder, if that's any better. Somebody will say in a minute, oh no, it's too loud. So I'm just going to wait a couple of seconds just while we make sure that's all okay. I'm afraid I did change my audio interface at one point, so it could be slightly different. There's lots of people saying thank you. Oh, better thanks. Oh, good. It's nice. Right, let's carry on. So, as I said, you can get in touch by email and also, of course, via social media and Facebook and everything else. The things I'm looking at this week are things that have come up actually by email and social media, things people have asked me for, and I thought these would be good things to share with you this time. So, let's start. To start off with, very little thing here. I didn't realise this until very recently. When you're adding key signatures to Dorico, and you might use capital letter for a major key, or you might use a lowercase letter for a minor key, and you probably also knew you can do things like say I would like 5S for 5 sharps, for example. But did you know Dorico can go up to 8 sharps? So you can see you've got a double sharp in there, and you can also, in this shift K popover, you can do 8 flats as well, just for 8B. I didn't know we could go up to 8, so there you go. Now you know. That wasn't the main thing I wanted to look at today. The reason I've got this file open, I have a file open at the top here, and I've got a file open at the bottom. Now this is nonsense music. I've taken a file somebody sent me and I've deliberately changed the pictures of the notes because I wasn't 100% sure if I was going to be allowed to use that exact example. Well, the question was, this is only a small example, but how do I change something, for example, from 12/8 into 4/4, and what can you do? And I thought, actually, there's a couple of nice things here to do with editing and using insert mode and how you can make some of these work. So at the beginning of this piece here, if I turn this into 4/4, what we want to do, of course, is shuffle these notes so they're in the right places. So, for example, if you imagine, I'm looking at the beats we have in each bar, and so that you can see the bar numbers more clearly, actually what you might want to do in layout options is for bar numbers, choose every bar. I've done, I was working in sections as well, so I'd created a layout previously with all the trombones or all the trumpets and that kind of thing, and it would tell me what was going on then for all of those instruments at the same time. But excuse me. This is a quick example of the kind of things I was doing. So when you're editing, and I'm just going to press enter here to start the caret line, make sure you're in insert mode, and then you can do things to shuffle these notes around to put them in the right beat. So of course, if you're looking at the bottom one here as an example, the reason I have it open in Dorico is that I can scroll around in here, and I'm using a Mac trackpad, so I can scroll around with 2 fingers on the trackpad without actually clicking on this section down here. So I can actually scroll both sections and put them in roughly the right place, and I can see that the bar numbers are going to add up if I need those as a reference. So anyway, I've got the caret line on here, and I've pressed I for insert. And when I press delete or backspace, it's going to delete the rest that's before it. So in this case, it's just that quaver or 8th note rest. So, and what I'm then going to do is move to the right here. Actually, I'm going to turn the caret line off because I want this this section here, the next three notes, to be in the previous bar. And there's a few ways you can do this. One would be to hold down Shift and select these notes, and you can use Alt and you can move them to the left. So if I press Alt left, or Option if you like, twice, then I end up here. And then if I press the shortcut for tuplets, which is my semicolon button, then Dorico will guess by default what it thinks that should be, so I can just press enter. So now I've got a tuplet here starting on the beat, and for entering those notes. And then this note here, again, if I turn the caret line on and I press backspace, then it's going to shuffle that to the beginning of the bar because it's deleting the rest that I had that was there. I'm now going to turn the caret line off and press 5, and that will shorten that note. Just for a second, I'm going to undo as well. You can also press Alt Shift left, and that will shorten the note. So just where I'd used Alt left to go, I'm using the rhythm grid here, and the rhythm grid's set to eighth notes or quavers. So you can use Alt left. Let me do this with one note. If I take this note and press Alt right or Alt left, I can move it, and if I use Alt Shift left and right, then I can extend it and shorten it. So I can do this, and I can now go through and edit lots of these notes to make these bars correct to be in 4/4. So for example, repeating with some of the things I've just done, so if I press delete now, it'll delete that rest, and I can delete that one, and then this one here needs to be just inside the previous bar. So what I'm going to do is going to take all of these notes because they're all under the same slur, and I'm going to go left with those. I need to shorten the first one, so I'm going to press Alt Shift left, and then this one needs to be here, and this one needs to be here, and I'm going to keep going for a second. Now you will sometimes find, for example here, I've got a slur which is now not quite in exactly the right place, but you can use the same kind of shortcuts. You can use Alt with left and right to move it, and you can use Alt and Shift with left to shorten it, or right to lengthen it. So you can see I've using the same concepts for the notes as I am for the slurs, for moving those and putting them in the right place. So I'm just going to now speed up and remove some of these. Try and concentrate on what I'm doing at the same time. You see here, if I move that one left on its own, it did have a slur in it, then the slur is now in the wrong place. So now what I'd have to do, for example, just doing this in a different way, is move that slur back with Alt and left. So I'm going to keep going, and then I can move this along so I can see what I'm doing. I'm now failing to type and talk at the same time, so bear with me a second. Also, if I press delete now, it would delete that whole rest, which isn't necessarily where I want it, but you can still press Alt and right and move it to the right place. So I'm going to do the same with this one. I'll move that one with Alt, move that one with delete, shorten it a bit, and do that one. Now, you might be thinking, this is still taking a while, and yes, it may be that in some cases, what you actually want to do is just replay the music live, because that might get you there quicker for what you need to do. But that can help. It depends how well you play. This particular piece, I didn't really know it at all, so I wanted to make sure I wasn't missing anything, misplaying anything, or anything else. So editing the existing notes for me in this particular case was going to be easier. So just a quick check. We're okay. So you can see there's combinations of editing, but all the time I had insert mode on, so that it's playing around with those rhythms and playing around with the notes. Things to beware though if you're doing this: if you had a rehearsal mark, they may still end up in the wrong place because you haven't shuffled them. So you might need to copy, move, cut, paste, whatever the rehearsal marks. Also things like dynamics, because this shuffling in insert mode, you're only acting on one voice. So if you have notes that are in more than one voice, in this particular staff, then when you're moving things, you are only moving them in one voice, so you have to be aware of that. So it was just, in some cases, this might be a good option for tidying up sections or a piece of music when you need to switch it into, for example, this case, between 12/8 and 4/4. Let me just check, see if there's anything. I don't think there's any questions yet, but I'm just going to have a quick check. Will you be able to edit the number of instruments playing in the score for Note Performer in the near future? I might be being slow. I'm not exactly sure. We are changing, looking at some things at the moment with playback and how those may work. At the moment, you do have the option in Dorico for whether it's a solo or a section player and having different sounds for those, but that won't answer this case of whether it's solo or A2. So we can't do that right now, but there are some things we're looking at that might help you with that, but I don't know exactly when that will be, so I can't be any more positive on that one, I'm afraid, at the moment, but certainly keep in touch. There's no other questions at the moment, I don't think, on anything I've just done. For a lot of people, that might be, yes, okay, we've used some of those, but I am aware that although we've shown things like editing some things in insert mode, and on a separate subject we've shown the kind of alt moving things and alt shift and extending things or shortening things, we've not kind of put them together in a project. So this was a case where using those and converting eighth notes into tuplets and those kind of things all actually work together, which was a nice little case. Presuming there's no questions, I'll carry on. So for the next little thing I wanted to look at, let me just close these two. There's a couple of things that, to be honest, right now Dorico doesn't solve for you, but some other people have given us some options using some fonts that they've created. So I wanted to just show a couple of those, because it's not some, if you need to do this kind of stuff in the next month, in the next couple of months, or until, the next year or whatever, until we get to work on these things with Dorico, then I thought it was worth showing some of these in a video. So the first one I want to look at, or first couple I want to look at, is around some jazz options. So for example, when you do things like metric modulation and those kind of things in Dorico, at the moment they can be a bit tricky. You can do metronome marks, and there are some metronome marks you can now do in Dorico that you can add. So for example, tempo equation options down here you can do. However, there are some things like triplet metric modulations that you can't really do by default. So an option for that is to download a font called Metrico. I will put links to these in the description underneath the video once this session's finished. But you can go to, this is on GitHub, you can get this Metrico font, and this is by a very clever chap. And you can basically download this one, and you can use some of these metric modulations then. Now, I will say that right now, in Dorico version 2.2.20 that I'm using on a Mac, there are some issues with basically with the framework, one of the frameworks we use in Dorico. So not all of these options will work, but I'll show you some that do. If you're on a PC, actually at the moment, you're not going to have these problems. You can download it and you'll be able to do all of these, but I'm just going to show you how these would work. So to start off with, I've already downloaded and installed the font. So all I've done is from, in fact I can show you, can't I? Let's do this completely. So from here, this is the documentation for it. And I'll put a link to this page, and you can click on this one, for example, Metrico OTF, and you can download that font and then double click on it and install it. Then have a look in, for example, the README file here, and this will tell you these details of what you need to know. So let's move that off the screen for a second. And over here, right, so in this project I want to add some options up here. So what you can do is you can either use the Shift-X text tool, or you can use the Shift-Alt-X, which is probably more useful for this one, because the Shift-Alt-X is a system-based text, so it will then appear on all of the parts, but it will only appear on the score once. And the simple way of doing this will be to just change the font option here and change it to Metrico, which is the font I've just downloaded. And then all you need to type in, and I showed the documentation in a minute, for example, is things like H, which gives you a half note. You can have W for whole note. You can have Q for quarter note. You can put spaces in with a space bar, and you can also put E for eighth note. So you can then mix these together, and you can say, for example, EE. Oh, my font changed. That was my fault. Let me do that again. I'll show you a quicker way of doing this in a second. So you can do EE, and then you can say equals 3QE, like that. And this one will work even on a Mac. The other ones often don't work because things are in slightly the wrong place with the tuplet brackets and that kind of thing. I will say we are aiming to solve that. So the framework that we use with Dorico, on the next Dorico update, it will be updated so that more of these options will work. So there you go. There's an option there for using Metrico. Now, if you're going to use this a lot and you want to use it often, that might, there are some slightly quicker ways of doing this. So one is to go into engrave mode, and for this bit you will need Dorico Pro, of course. For the other things I've shown so far, you'd be fine in Dorico Elements. If you go to paragraph styles, you can define a new paragraph style. So I'm going to say plus, I'm going to call it something like Jazz Mod, Jazz Met. Let's call it Jazz Metrico, because that's what we're actually going to be using at this point. And I'll change the font for that. You can set size and set some of the other options in here should you want to. And then the important thing you want to do once you've defined this is press the star. And that's the save as default option. So now it's saved as default. That gives you another little bonus, which is when you go into the preferences in Dorico for key commands, then you can now search for the Jazz Metrico option you've created, and you can create a shortcut either as text or as system text. And I said system text is the more useful one. So I'm just going to create a little shortcut just as a one-off for that. You don't necessarily have to use this one. It's just going to be my Jazz Metrico option. Now, you can't do that shortcut bit if you haven't done the star and saved as default. So in here now, this section here, all I need to do is press my shortcut, which starts the text tool and puts it in the right type of font, because I'm using the right paragraph style. So now I can just type in my EE equals 3QE, and that's a lot quicker, and it will be the right size and everything else if you've set that in your paragraph style. So if you want to use those kind of things, that would probably be a good option. I noticed there's some other options as well that you can do. So you can say, for example, they have repeat marks and things like that if you need to use things like that. But as I said, not all of the options currently work on a Mac at the current time of doing this session. Let me just see if there's a couple of questions. There's some comments in here. Yes, it would be nice if the font drop-down had some spaces at the top to keep the most used fonts. Yes, things like Microsoft Word and Photoshop and things do that. Yes, that would be quite nice. But you can set a shortcut for some of these things, so you hopefully don't need to choose the font as often because you can set a paragraph style for it. Can you assign 2 keyboard shortcuts for a particular function? Yes, you can. So for a dotted note, you could have the option of a numpad or on the main keyboard. Yes, you can do that. In fact, you'll notice some things actually do already have two shortcuts, some on the numpad, because not everybody has a numeric keypad. So some of the shortcuts apply on the numeric keypad and apply on the top of the keyboard. And I have heard of somebody who also uses Finale and Sibelius, and they've set the numbers across the top of the keyboard to be the same as Finale, and the ones on the numeric keypad to be the ones the same as Sibelius, which means that 4 or 5 do different things depending on which one you're pressing. You can also use those in conjunction, and we're talking about this key commands section here. You can set multiple key commands in here. You can also use them in conjunction with a MIDI learn. So you can have multiple key commands to do the same thing, and a MIDI learn key if you want it. And I've now noticed that Dan Cried has answered all that already. Sorry. Paul, you've said it seems I can have one or other but not both. So if you've got a problem with that, drop me an email on discoverdorico@steinberg.de or get in touch with our support team and we'll see what's going on there. Right, moving on for a second. Another option in here, I'm just going to delete this one and put it out of the way, is when you're adding some options, So things like chord analysis and that kind of thing. There's another font that's useful for this kind of thing. So what I mean, and I'm going to go back to the web. There's another font here by another clever man, and this one is useful for typing things like this, but you actually get things like this. So you can see the flats and the sevens and the 4/3 and the diminished and those kind of things. They can be entered. So what you need to do is you can download the font from here, and I'll put a link underneath the description again. And for this, what I would normally use is I would probably abuse the lyrics option in Dorico, because then it will sit nicely underneath. And you can also have lyrics above, of course, so they'll sit nicely. So I would probably use the lyrics option for this, but in a slightly different way. But I also noticed while I was doing this and setting up an example, there were a couple of things that I thought, oh, that might catch somebody out. So let's look at those. So the example I'm going to set up, actually I've missed a couple of chords at the beginning, haven't I? Let me just alt-click those in. Don't alt-click above the staff, as I just tried to do. Alt-click in the staff, otherwise it won't copy. So what we're going to do now is you need, for Dorico, you can't just say Shift L and add some lyrics, because if I write hello, then you'll get one, and then when you start to do other things, it will disappear, which is quite annoying. So what I would recommend is work out how you want to do your slashes first. These notes here are slashes where if you go into engrave mode, I have turned off turned on the hide stem option, so the stems have disappeared. So what I've done with those is just use the new slash voice. So in write mode, I've created a slash voice. I've then used that slash voice, and you can see I can toggle now between normal notes and slash notes, and I've entered some notes, and then I've used that hide stem option. And the nice thing is that once you've used that option, you can then repeat them. The reason I mention this is that if you were to do this and say, oh, I'm going to use a slash region, then you select the first bit and you say Shift L and you start typing the lyrics, they disappear, which is quite annoying. And that's because slash regions tend to hide things like notes, and so the lyrics are also disappearing. So what you also could do is, if you don't want to bother with slash notes, and I think my microphone's just gone a bit strange, let me know if you have an audio glitch at your end. I'm getting some distortion. Somebody let me know if there's any problem at your end as well. Is the sound back now? Sounds like there was a problem for a second. I'm roboting. Yes, well, that's what I thought might be happening. Well, there's due to the delay on the audio feed and the comments, I think we're all back. Everybody being positive, loud and clear. Good, right, carry on. Where did we get to? Let's presume we can carry on. So the other option for entering notes here, and if it may be quicker in some cases, is to just enter any old note. It doesn't matter which note, really doesn't matter, because then you've got something you can attach your lyrics to. And this may help that if you are using lyrics to do this, then it may be that actually what you want to do is to have entered, you might want to enter particular notes instead of just entering a bunch of crotchets, quarter notes. It's up to you. So your choice at this point. But it then means that I can enter my lyrics. So for things like analysis type things, you can say, you want to be entering things like this. My tip here, my next tip, is that when you do this, if you go to engrave mode and font styles, that you don't use the lyrics font option and change this one, but you use the lyrics translation font. And that's because you may find that you want to use some lyrics as well in one of these files, and that would be annoying. So if you use the lyrics translation font, you're less likely to be using that for standard lyrics. You can then use the lyrics translation font and turn this to the font that we were just going to use, which is here, Capania. I presume it's Capania, and that's how you say it. You can choose, do you want italics? Probably not. You can change your font size if you want to, and press OK. So now, when you go into lyric entry here, you press Alt down, and you get 1 star here. And the difference, if I enter normal lyrics, if I say I am 7, the difference between that one and going 1 star is that your 7s now, of course, you can choose different sizes and fonts and italics for these, but you'll get them in the right way. So you can also say things like this, and you'll now get them correct. I'm just going to delete that one so they can all line up. And you can still use, if you want to, you can still use things like the melisma lines and things like that, should you want to. So if I'll enter a few of these for a second. So that was, if I now carry on, you should find, yeah, so we have various other options, and I've mistyped that one, so that was my fault. Let's do that again. That you'll get, your superscript, subscript, and you can enter things that way using that font, and just using the lyrics option in Dorico, but using the lyrics translation option. Somebody said, I wonder if this will segue into figured bass. Who knows? Who knows? There's also nice options I noticed in this font, so you can do things like, say, don't forget to do Alt down for 1 star. To do things like, say, this, you can say star, and you can say O, which will give you diminished, and you can also say 0, which will give you a half diminished. So there's some neat little options in there. Effectively, they're kind of like shortcuts that you're typing into the popover to get the results that you want. So that's a nice, a nice option, because right now that doesn't really exist by default in Dorico. Neatly segueing into, if there's no questions, don't think so, figured bass. We also, right now, don't have figured bass options in Dorico, but I know some people would like it. So I know some people have already used this. So by one of these clever people, actually it's the same clever person in this case, you can use a font called Figurato. See, it's the same person. So using Florian's Figurato option, you can use figured bass in Dorico. So again, I will put a link to this in the description so you can go and get the right font. I also need to say that right now there are some things that on a Mac, as I'm using, don't completely work, whereas they will on a PC. So there's a Figurato Mac specific option, and we're going to do an example like this one. And there are some, and it tells you in here, the kind of things you can do and the kind of things you can't do. But Mac users, please read this, because there are some things that don't quite work yet on a Mac until we, the Dorico developers, say we, I'm not a Dorico developer, until our much people, cleverer people than me, have changed the, have been able to change the framework, and then we can use all of these options. So let me just, there's a question from, oh yes, Frank, hello. Yes, it would be useful to have a different set of styles for analysis and figured bass. Yes, although to be honest, it would be useful to have a particular tool for things like figured bass instead of abusing lyrics. But yes, we will get there in time. But this is me trying to help you out because we haven't quite got there yet. So here is my Figurato example. Let's just stick this into galley view. So we're going to do the same thing in here. So very similar to what we did with the previous example. So if you go to engrave font styles and choose, you can use lyrics font if you want, but I would use lyrics translation font. And make sure you slide this over so you can change this to Figurato, in my case Figurato Mac, but not if you're using the Windows version. And then also I've changed the size here. The recommendation was, instead of using the default 11, was to use 10. So I'm going to do that and press OK. So again, now in this particular font, and this is where the documentation will come in useful that I will link to, you can enter lots of options here for exactly what you want. So let's look at some examples. You can put, for example, in here, if I select this note, Shift L, I'm going to Alt down for the lyrics translation font again, and I can type 6.5. just press the space bar to move on, and I can press 7. And you can, for sharp, you can either use the sharp symbol, or you can just use S. And if you want it, in this case, you want it to be on a new line, then you just use comma. So there we go. So let's push that onto a new line, and keep doing this one. There's also some other options you can use, and if you don't want the lyric extension options at the bottom, then the easiest way to do those is to filter them and turn them off in the properties panel later. Again, Florian's very handily put that in the documentation as to his recommendations for speed and how you might do it. His other option actually for some of these was to say, when you're entering things like this one, don't use the spacebar to move on. So if I just delete these two, and I'll show you what he means. If I go back into here and say 4, use the right arrow, because then you won't get those extension lines. So you can use that option too. So you can, there's various options you can put in here. There's also things like you can use either a slash, or you can use a slash, and you can use plus as well. Oops, no, I didn't mean to do that one. I meant to put them separately. You can tell I'm not very good at this, can't you? So let's do things like that one, and you can do things like that one as well, and so on. Now there are some extra examples that exist on the PC option. So if you're doing this on the PC, then you'll be fine. And I can see Ben slightly ahead of me. He's just said pressing right arrow instead of space prevents lines. Any way to put the figures above the music? Well, because these are lyrics, if you want to move or change these, once you've selected one, if you use the Control-Shift-A or Command-Shift-A, then you can select a bar, or if you press it again, you can select lots of them, and then you have the same options that you'd have for lyrics. So, for example, a line placement you can put above. You might need to change your line placements a bit, but you can do it, yes, and you can move them above, and you can also use F to flip things. You might, like I said, you might need to tweak some of where some of these things sit to make them exist above and below. What I mean for the for font spacings and things like that. But yes, there are options to do that if you want to. And as I've said, this isn't really a Dorico default option. This isn't really a Dorico feature. This is Florian and also Mark for the other font being quite clever with how they've created these fonts, and this is us kind of abusing the lyrics translation option or the lyrics option in Dorico to make use of these so that you can get some of this work done quicker in Dorico at the moment instead of waiting till we do a proper feature on it. Yes, obviously, when we do a proper feature, we'd like to look at the spacing and everything else and all the options that you want by default, but we just haven't got around to that yet, so I wanted to make sure you could do it now if possible. Now, I should also say that if you want more examples and options for, especially for figure bass, then what I would say is look at a couple of options online. One is the scoring notes blog. So here, where Florian actually has done an article on it, and there's some examples here of things that work and how it works. Lots of the options. He also will go into some of the detail about some of the things that might not work on a Mac and compatibility wise. As I said, we're aiming to solve that relatively soon, hopefully. But there are some options on here, and you can write comments as well, of course, on scoring notes at the bottom if you want to, if you've got any questions. Another good place to go is, of course, the Steinberg forum. And if you search on the Dorico forum, then you'll find there's some options on there as well so this is what the forum looks like until you log in. Then if you look on the forum, then you can also find some conversations and you can ask questions about it and some of the things on there. So there are people on there, in fact I can see some of them in the comments already, who use this a lot more than I do. Let me just have a look. So is it a question about using yes, if you've got a melody with a pickup note sled to a repeat ending, yes, at the moment LV ties are a good option for that. In fact, for some of these I've set a shortcut for LV ties so that I can then use it and abuse it, and if you've got one that does that works, for example, one way, there's nothing to stop you dragging it to move it the other way as well if you need to use these kind of things for repeats and beginnings of sections and that kind of thing. So yes, you can use those LV ties, and if you want to, you can make a shortcut for that. Right, The next option, I always try to keep these sessions to half an hour and fail almost every time. This is the the last thing I wanted to show, which was another thing about cueing in drum parts and in percussion parts. Actually, let's do a new, fresh example. So let's say, for example, the question came up, I think it was on Facebook this time, and somebody said, I want to make a percussion part, but I need to show the pitches of the cue so that they know exactly where they are. And I'll show you the problem first. So if we have, for example, a bass drum, and then we have some bars to work with, and at some point the drummer is going to play. So let's enter some notes. There we go. And because percussion, it was explained, obviously, percussionists often can spend a lot of time sitting around counting. And what would be nice is to show them a cue. But what you can't do is easily give them a cue, especially if it's a rhythmic cue. So let's say we add a violin into here. What I have shown previously, and I'll put this in galley view, is an example where we added cues into drum parts by copying it into another instrument, and that still applies for a lot of cases where you just want a rhythmic cue. If you go back to one of our previous videos, just have a quick search in YouTube, then and I'll try and put a link underneath this video as well. But that still may be a good option. This is a slightly different case. So this is, I don't know what they're going to be playing. So there you go. Let's say they're going to be playing, something in the violins, and you want to cue that. In fact, let's make it a bit longer as well. So what you can't do is in this bass drum part, so use the cues option and say violin like you can with other instruments. That doesn't work. Also, this is a single line instrument, so where would you put the pitches anyway? So here's an option. I hope it works in a lot of cases. It might not work in absolutely every case you're looking at, but let's this will work, I think, for a lot of people. If you give your bass drum player another instrument, doesn't matter what it is, I'm going to say flute. Now in galley view, you're going to see this flute in here at the moment. You can now, in here, if I select these two bars, I can now say I want to cue the violin. Okay? Now because this is a bass drum and flute instrument, then I get this. I've got my violin here and my bass drum starting here. So I've started to get the cue in here, but there's a few things that you might want to tidy up. And if there are other things, let me know afterwards. But I think, at least in some cases that I've looked at so far, these will help. So for example, if you don't want these labels, then you can edit the name here. You could, if you need to, remove the word flute and the FL, because you don't really care what the instrument is. You'll also notice over here on the layouts, and this will also be shown up here, it says bass drum and, because I've just deleted the name. So you might also want to go into your as well, or instead remove the ampersand from there, so it's just a bass drum. So now it's got my violin cue, and it's not labelled oddly here. Okay, that's not looking too bad so far. However, there's a few other things you might want to do. What I would do is take your violin part here, and using the clefs option, so Shift C, just type perk and give the violin, not the violin, what am I doing? The flute, type perk, so that your flute player never has the wrong clef. The advantage then is that here, of course, he's got the right clef at the beginning, and here, where you've got the cue, you may or may not want this change here. So what you could also do at that point, if you don't want it, is to say for this cue, when you select the label here, you can say it doesn't have a transposed clef. It doesn't need one. So it may be that you want to put this in and you don't need to specify whether it's a treble or a bass clef, because the word violin gives it away as to what it is. So this might be a useful option for then showing who got the cue, or who you're supposed to be listening out for, and what they play just before you play. You may find, for example, that if this note was slightly early, then you're going to get this. You're going to end up with two staves. So you may also find that what you want to do is take this handle and shorten the cue at some point, so that you can get exactly what you want for the amount of the cue that you want, keeping it all on the same line before your bass drum comes in. So, and really, it's just to minimise the amount of counting that the percussionist has to do before they have to come in. So even if you have to leave a couple of bars, it's only a couple of bars they have to count before they come in, because they know what the violins or somebody else was playing. Another quick example here is this one, where you've got a drum kit part, and when the trumpets or brass, or the brass section or whatever in a big band comes in, if you wanted to label those. So you can see here there's a trumpet in B flat Q, which looks like it's on the drum part, because again the drummer has two instruments. One, I've removed the label over there as well, and on the drum kit part here, then you can see he's got a trumpet cue. And there are also options for these labels as to where you want them to display. So if you want it to be above, and those kind of things, you can change those either as an override or otherwise. But sometimes actually showing a rhythmic cue in a drum part or in a percussion part is useful. So I just wanted to show you how one way you might be able to achieve that by adding a pitched instrument into your otherwise unpitched drums or percussion. So, as I said, I failed to keep to the half an hour. Let me just see if there's any questions from any of those things at this point. Yes, as Frank said, clever solution so far until a real pitch cues feature exists for percussion. Yes, and at the moment, because drum staves are very different in Dorico internally, if you've seen any of the other videos or tried using them, they're very clever for what they do for percussion, but for displaying pitches as well, that's interesting. So yes, until we're able to devote some time to that, this hopefully will solve a lot of those cases for you. I'm just looking at playback. Yes, for correct slurred playback, depends on the exact case, Lee. You might find that if you adjust the note length in play mode, that you might be able to get what you need that way, because you can adjust the played length of a note in play mode separately to how long it actually displays in write mode. So that might help you in conjunction with an LV tie. But if it is an LV tie, then it might not. It depends on the case. Again, if there is a specific case you want to look at, then email it over or put it on social media, and we'll have a look. So if there's no other questions at that one, thank you for the good questions, and more importantly, the really good answers we've had from people on social media and on Facebook and things, and the forum recently. There've been some really good answers, and it's a great community now for people who are asking questions and getting the answers that they need quickly for the projects. So thank you to all of you for doing that. Also, if you want to email me for ideas for this session, then discover Dorico, which is all one word, discover Dorico at steinberg.de is the email address for these. And yeah, you can ask me questions, and if you've got useful examples, you think it would be, here's a good idea to show this, or I'm stuck with something, could you do a video on this? Where it may, and also especially if it kind of combines multiple things together, so we can kind of show them instead of just one specific feature, but using a bit of this and a bit of something else, then just let me know, and we can use that for future sessions. So until next time, if there's no other questions, I will stay on the chat for a little bit to see if there's any questions. But thank you for watching. So until next time, well, thank you very much.